The digital clock on the hospital reception desk read 11:47 p.m. when Marcus Thompson began his third cup of coffee. Chicago General Hospital's night shift was usually predictable. A few drunk patients, worried family members, and the occasional vagrant trying to escape the November cold. At 28, Marcus had been working security for 3 years, and he'd perfected the art of being firm but fair. "Another quiet one, huh, Marcus?" called out Janet, the night nurse, as she passed by with a clipboard full of charts. "Knock on wood," Marcus replied, tapping the wooden reception desk. He'd learned never to say a shift was going well out loud. It was like tempting fate. Marcus pulled his black security jacket tighter as he walked toward the main entrance for his hourly rounds. The Chicago wind whistled through the automatic doors each time they opened, carrying with it the sense of the city, exhaust fumes, distant food trucks, and the promise of an early winter. He'd taken this job after his plans for college fell through. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and after growing up in foster care, steady was something Marcus valued above almost everything else. He had a small apartment in Pilsen, a reliable Honda Civic, and enough saved up to maybe take some community college classes next year. It wasn't the life he'd dreamed of, but it was his. As he walked past the emergency room, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the glass doors. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders from weekend basketball games at the local court, and eyes that had seen more than most people his age. His supervisor always said he had a good instinct for reading people, knowing when someone was genuinely in distress versus just trying to cause trouble. The automatic doors slid open as an ambulance pulled up, its red and blue lights painting the hospital walls in urgent colors. Marcus stepped aside as the paramedics rushed in with an elderly woman, her family trailing behind with worried faces and hushed prayers in Spanish. This was the part of the job that Marcus found both hardest and most meaningful. He'd watch families get the best and worst news of their lives, sometimes within minutes of each other. He'd learned to be invisible when people needed privacy and present when they needed comfort, even if that comfort was just a reassuring nod or directions to the cafeteria. By 1:15 a.m., the emergency had settled down, and Marcus was back to his quiet rounds. He checked the parking garage, walked through the main corridors, and ensured all the exits were secure. The hospital at night felt like a different world. Dimmed lights, hushed conversations, and the constant hum of machines keeping people alive. As he returned to the main lobby, Marcus noticed someone sitting on the bench outside the main entrance. The figure was hunched over, wearing what looked like several layers of clothing despite the mild evening. Marcus sighed quietly. This was the part of the job he liked least, having to ask homeless individuals to move along. The hospital had a policy: no loitering, no exceptions. But Marcus had grown up knowing what it felt like to not have a safe place to sleep, and he'd always tried to handle these situations with as much dignity as possible. He pushed through the glass doors and approached the figure on the bench. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said gently. "I'm afraid you can't stay here overnight." The man on the bench looked up, and Marcus was struck by his eyes. Clear, intelligent, and utterly exhausted. He appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair that might have been neat once, and clothes that had seen better days but weren't. Dirty. This wasn't what Marcus typically expected from someone sleeping rough. "I'm sorry, officer," the man said, his voice cultured with just a hint of a southern accent. "I was just resting. I'll move along." "It's okay. No rush," Marcus found himself saying, even though protocol dictated he should have the man move immediately. "But I do need to ask you to find somewhere else to spend the night. Hospital policy." The man nodded and slowly stood up, wincing slightly as if his back bothered him. He picked up a worn leather satchel that had seen better days but was still carefully maintained. "Thank you for being kind about it," the man said. "Most security guards just call the police." Marcus studied the man more carefully. There was something different about him, a dignity that hadn't been worn away by life on the streets, a way of speaking that suggested education, maybe even refinement. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with the question. "William," the man replied. "William Patterson." "I'm Marcus. Listen, William, the weather's supposed to drop tonight. You know about the shelter over on Madison? William's expression grew complicated. I've tried the shelters. Sometimes they're difficult places for someone like me. Marcus understood. He'd heard stories about the shelters, overcrowded, sometimes dangerous, always overwhelmed. For someone who seemed as gentle as William, they might indeed be more frightening than the streets. There's a 24-hour diner about 6 blocks south, Marcus offered. Murphy's. They'll let you sit as long as you order coffee. The owner's decent people. William's face softened with genuine gratitude. That's very kind of you to suggest. Thank you, Marcus. As William began to walk away, something made Marcus call out. William, wait. Can I ask? How long have you been on the streets? William paused, his back still turned. About 8 months now. He turned around slowly. Lost my apartment when I lost my job. Turns out when you're 54 and have been out of work for a while, starting over isn't as simple as it used to be. The honesty in William's voice hit Marcus unexpectedly hard. Here was a man who could have been anyone's father, uncle, teacher, reduced to sleeping on benches and being moved along by security guards. What kind of work did you do? Marcus asked. I was a social worker, William said with a sad smile. Worked with children in the foster system for 22 years. Ironic, isn't it? I spent my career finding homes for kids who had nowhere to go, and now? The words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A recognition, a connection he couldn't quite name. Foster kids, Marcus repeated quietly. Yes, it was my calling, you might say. I never married, never had children of my own, but those they were my purpose. Marcus's throat felt tight. What happened to your job? William's shoulders sagged slightly. Budget cuts. The agency downsized and they kept the younger workers. Said they were sorry, gave me a small severance, and that was it. 22 years gone. The two men stood in the pool of light from the hospital entrance, the November wind picking up around them. Marcus knew he should send William on his way. He'd already spent more time on this than he should have. Instead, he heard himself saying, "The diner closes at 3 a.m. for cleaning. If you need somewhere to sit after that, there's a 24-hour laundromat on Ashland. It's warm and the attendant usually doesn't mind if you're quiet." William's eyes filled with something that might have been tears. You don't have to help me like this. I know, Marcus said, but I want to. As William walked away into the Chicago night, Marcus stood watching until the older man disappeared around the corner. He returned to his security desk with a strange feeling in his stomach, like he'd just met someone important, though he couldn't explain why. 3 nights later, Marcus was surprised to see William sitting on the same bench outside the hospital. This time he wasn't sleeping. He was reading a paperback book under the streetlight, occasionally looking up at the hospital entrance. With what seemed like purposeful attention, Marcus pushed through the glass doors prepared to have the same conversation as before, but William stood up immediately. Hello, Marcus, William said. Don't worry, I'm not planning to sleep here again. I wanted to thank you properly for your kindness the other night. You don't need to thank me, Marcus replied, but he found himself genuinely glad to see William again. The older man looked a bit better, cleaner, like he'd managed to find a shower somewhere. I took your advice about Murphy's Diner, William continued. The owner, Mrs. Murphy, she's exactly as kind as you said. She even let me help with some small tasks in exchange for meals. That's great, Marcus said, and meant it. You look better. William smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. I feel better. Having somewhere to go, something to do, and it makes a difference. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before William spoke again. Can I ask you something, Marcus? Sure. You mentioned foster kids the other night. And something in your voice, or were you in the system yourself? Marcus felt his usual defenses rise. He didn't typically discuss his childhood with anyone, especially not strangers. But something about William, maybe it was his professional background or maybe it was just his gentle way of asking, made the walls come down a little. Yeah, Marcus said quietly. From age 6 to 18. William nodded with understanding. That explains your kindness and your wariness. What do you mean? You help, but you keep your distance. You offer practical solutions but avoid getting too involved. It's a survival mechanism from the system. Care enough to help, but not enough to get hurt when people leave. Marcus stared at William, unsettled by how accurately the older man had read him. You really were a social worker. For 22 years, William confirmed. I worked with hundreds of kids who had that same careful way of helping others while protecting themselves. Did you? Marcus hesitated, then pushed forward. Did you ever think about adoption? I mean, working with all those kids. William's expression grew complex, sad and wistful at the same time. I thought about it every day. But single men in their 30s and 40s, the system doesn't typically favor us for adoption. And by the time I was established enough to really fight for it, I was getting older, and the agencies, he shrugged. They said I could be a great foster parent, but adoption was unlikely. So you never tried? I tried once, William said quietly. There was a boy, about your age actually. He'd been in the system for years, was about to age out. Smart kid, good heart, but he'd learned not to trust adults who made promises. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. What happened? The paperwork was almost complete. I'd been his caseworker for 2 years, and we'd built a real relationship. He was going to move in with me, and we were going to make it official. William's voice grew heavy. Then my supervisor decided it was a conflict of interest, said I was too emotionally invested to make professional decisions about his case. They stopped the adoption. They transferred him to another caseworker and told me to maintain professional boundaries. 3 months later, he aged out of the system. I tried to stay in touch, but by then... William shrugged sadly. By then, he didn't trust that I hadn't abandoned him by choice. Marcus felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. The story was too familiar, too close to his own experience of adults who'd tried to help but had been forced away by systems and policies. What was his name? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure why. David, William said. David Thompson. The world seemed to stop spinning. Marcus stared at William, his mind racing. Thompson had been his name in the system, the surname they'd given him when he'd been taken from his birth family. David had been his middle name, the one his caseworkers had used to differentiate him from the other Davids in the system. Marcus David Thompson, Marcus whispered. William's book fell from his hands, hitting the pavement with a soft thud. His face went white, then flushed, then white again. Oh my God, William breathed. Marcus, my Marcus. The two men stood frozen on the hospital sidewalk, staring at each other as 28 years of separation collapsed into a single moment of recognition. Marcus felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. You were taller, William said, his voice barely above a whisper. And you had that scar on your chin from when you fell off your bike. Marcus unconsciously touched the small scar, still visible though faded with time. You taught me to ride that bike, in the parking lot behind the social services building. You were so determined, William continued, tears beginning to stream down his face. You kept getting back up every time you fell. You said you were going to learn if it killed you. The memories came flooding back to Marcus. Afternoons spent in William's small office, doing homework while William finished paperwork. Weekend outings to museums and parks. The careful way William had explained, the adoption process, how they would be a real family, how Marcus would never have to worry about being moved again. I waited for you, Marcus said, his own voice breaking. After they moved me to the Hendersons, I kept waiting for you to come get me. I thought you'd changed your mind about wanting me. William's face crumpled. I tried, Marcus. I fought them. For months. I wrote letters, filed appeals, got a lawyer. But they said it was final, that it was better for you to have a fresh start with a family that could give you a normal home. The Hendersons were okay, Marcus said quickly, seeing William's pain. They were good people, they weren't you. I never stopped thinking about you, William said. I kept track of you through the system as long as I could. I knew you graduated high school, that you were working. I wanted to reach out when you turned 18, but I was afraid you'd think I'd abandoned you. Marcus felt 20 years of careful emotional walls crumbling. This man, this homeless man he'd been prepared to dismiss 3 nights ago, was the person who had been closest to becoming his father. The person whose loss had taught him never to get too attached to the idea that adults would stay. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked. "When we first met, you must have known my name." "I wasn't sure," William admitted. "Marcus is a common name and Thompson. But when you asked about foster kids, something in your eyes reminded me of that boy I knew. I kept coming back, hoping to see you again, to figure out if it could really be you." The November wind whipped around them, but neither man seemed to notice the cold. They were lost in the surreal reality of finding each other in the most unlikely circumstances. "I can't believe you're here," Marcus said. "I can't believe you're homeless," William finished with a sad smile. "Life has a sense of irony, doesn't it? I spent my career trying to give kids stable homes, and now I can't even maintain one for myself." Marcus looked at this man who had once represented safety and possibility, now worn down by circumstances and bad luck. The protectiveness he'd felt as a child came rushing back, mixed with the adult understanding of just how fragile security could be. "Come inside," Marcus said suddenly. "Marcus, I can't. You'll get in trouble. There's a family waiting room on the 3rd floor. It's always empty at night, and it has comfortable chairs. Just for tonight." William shook his head. "I won't risk your job." "You're not risking anything," Marcus said firmly. "I'm inviting you. There's a difference." The authority in Marcus's voice reminded William of the determined child who had insisted on learning to ride that bike. Some things apparently never changed. "Are you sure?" William asked. "I'm sure," Marcus said. "We have 20 years to catch up on." As they walked through the hospital corridors together, Marcus caught sight of their reflection in the darkened window of the gift shop. A security guard and a homeless man, walking side by side. No one looking at them would guess they were the closest thing to father and son either had ever known. The 3rd floor family waiting room was exactly as Marcus had described. Empty, comfortable, and warm. William settled into one of the upholstered chairs while Marcus grabbed 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall. The fluorescent lights were dimmed for night hours, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the institutional setting. "I still can't believe it's really you," William said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "You've grown into a good man, Marcus. I can see it in how you carry yourself, how you treated me before you knew who I was." Marcus sat across from William, studying the face that had aged considerably since his memories, but was still unmistakably the same person who had made him feel safe as a child. "Tell me what happened," Marcus said. "After they moved me. I need to know." William sipped his coffee slowly, organizing his thoughts. "I fought the decision for 8 months. I hired a lawyer with money I didn't have, filed every appeal I could think of. My supervisor eventually told me that if I didn't drop it, they'd have me terminated for harassment." "So, you gave up?" "I never gave up," William said firmly. "But I realized that making them angry wasn't going to help you. They'd already placed you with the Hendersons and you seemed to be adjusting well. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe you deserved a traditional family instead of a single man who was married to his job." Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest, the same one he'd felt as a 12-year-old trying to understand why the adult he trusted most had disappeared from his life. "I kept working with other kids," William continued. "But something changed after that. I became more cautious, more professional. I was afraid to get too attached because I'd learned how easily it could all be taken away." "Did you ever try to adopt again?" William shook his head. "I told myself I would someday, but the years went by, and I got older, and it seemed less and less likely that the system would approve me. By the time I was in my 40s, I'd convinced myself that I was better as a caseworker, helping lots of kids instead of focusing on just one." Marcus understood that logic, even as it made him sad. How many children might have found homes with William if the system hadn't punished him for caring too much about one particular child? "What about you?" William asked. "Tell me about the Hendersons. Were they good to you?" Marcus considered how to answer, The Hendersons had been kind, decent people who had provided for his basic needs and treated him fairly. But they'd never felt like family. Not the way those few months with William had begun to feel. They were good people, Marcus said carefully. They made sure I had what I needed, helped me with school, supported me when I wanted to play basketball. But it always felt temporary, you know? Like I was a long-term house guest rather than their son. Did they adopt you? No. They were older, in their 50s when I moved in. They said they were happy to be foster parents but weren't looking to adopt. I think they liked the idea that I'd eventually become independent and move on. William's face showed the pain of understanding exactly what that kind of uncertainty felt like for a child. I'm sorry, William said. I'm so sorry you never got the permanent family you deserved. I survived, Marcus said, though he could hear the defensive edge in his own voice. I graduated, got a job, have my own place. I turned out okay. You turned out more than okay, William observed. But surviving isn't the same as thriving, and you deserved to thrive. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of how different things might have been. Through the waiting room windows, Chicago glittered in the distance, millions of people living their lives unaware of this quiet reunion happening in a hospital after midnight. Can I ask you something? Marcus said eventually. Anything. That night we first met again, you were reading a book. What were you reading? William reached into his satchel and pulled out the worn paperback. It's about the foster care system, actually. Research on long-term outcomes for children who age out without permanent families. I've been trying to understand, trying to figure out if there was something more I could have done for you and for the other kids I worked with. Marcus looked at the book. Pages marked with careful notes in William's familiar handwriting, passages highlighted and annotated. Even homeless and struggling, William was still thinking about the children he'd tried to help. You did more than you know, Marcus said quietly. Those months with you were the only time I ever felt like I might actually belong somewhere. Even after they moved me, I carried that feeling with me. It's probably why I'm able to help people. Now, in my own small way. William's eyes filled with tears again. I've wondered every day for 20 years if I failed you. You didn't fail me, Marcus said firmly. The system failed both of us. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone. About the loneliness of growing up without a sense of permanent belonging. About the careful way he'd learned to keep people at arm's length. About the dreams he'd had as a child of what it would feel like to have a real father. I used to practice, Marcus admitted, staring into his coffee cup. When I was living with the Hendersons, I'd practice what I'd say if you ever came to get me. I had this whole speech prepared about how I'd been good, how I'd kept up with my schoolwork, how I was ready to come home. William's hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee. I drove by the Henderson house once, about 6 months after you'd moved in. I sat in my car across the street hoping to catch a glimpse of you, to see if you seemed happy. Did you see me? You were in the front yard shooting baskets with Mr. Henderson. You were laughing at something he said. William's voice grew thick. You looked content, and I thought maybe they'd been right. Maybe you were better off with a real family. Marcus remembered that day, remembered Mr. Henderson patiently rebounding his missed shots, offering gentle corrections to his form. It had been a good moment, one of many decent moments with the Hendersons, but it hadn't been the same as the way William used to cheer enthusiastically for every small improvement. The way he'd made Marcus feel like his successes were the most important things in the world. I wasn't better off, Marcus said quietly. I was fine, but I wasn't better off. They were interrupted by the sound of Marcus's radio crackling to life. Security to ER, security to ER. Marcus sighed and stood up. I have to check on something. Will you be okay here for a few minutes? Of course. Go do your job. The emergency turned out to be minor. A confused elderly patient who'd wandered away from his room and gotten lost in the corridors. Marcus helped the nursing staff get the man back to his bed, but the interruption had reminded him that he was still on duty, still responsible for the safety of everyone in the building. When he returned to the waiting room, he found William, standing by the window looking out at the city lights. I should go, William said without turning around. You've already taken enough risks bringing me up here. You don't have to go anywhere, Marcus replied. Yes, I do. William turned to face him. This is your job, your life. I can't complicate that for you. Marcus recognized the impulse, the same instinct to protect others by removing yourself from their lives that had probably kept William from reaching out over the years. What if I don't want you to go? Marcus asked. William's expression grew, pained. Marcus, I'm homeless. I don't have anything to offer you except complications and reminders of a system that hurt us both. You're offering me the chance to know the person who mattered most to me as a kid, Marcus countered. That's not nothing. But what kind of relationship can we have? I sleep in shelters and 24-hour diners. You have a life, a career, responsibilities. What am I supposed to be to you now? The question hung heavy between them. Marcus had been wondering the same thing since the moment of recognition. What do you call someone who was almost your father but never officially became one? How do you rebuild a relationship that was interrupted by bureaucracy and bad timing? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But I know I'm not ready to lose you again. William's composure finally cracked completely. He sank back into the chair, put his head in his hands, and began to sob. 20 years of grief and regret and lost possibilities pouring out of him. Marcus moved to the chair beside him, uncertain what to do. As a child, William had comforted him through nightmares and disappointments. Now the roles were reversed, and Marcus felt the full weight of how much they had both lost. I'm sorry, William managed through his tears. I'm so sorry for all of it. For not fighting harder, for not finding you sooner, for ending up like this when you needed me to be strong. Marcus put a hand on William's shoulder, the same gesture William had used to comfort him decades ago. You don't have anything to apologize for, Marcus said. And you don't have to be strong right now. Not for me. They sat together in the dimmed waiting room, a security guard and a homeless man grieving for the family they'd almost been and trying to figure out if it was possible to build something new from the pieces of what remained. True courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to be vulnerable with the people who matter. The sun was beginning to rise over Chicago, painting the waiting room windows with soft orange light. Marcus's shift would end in an hour, and he could feel the weight of the night's revelations settling in his bones. I need to ask you something, Marcus said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. And I need you to be honest with me. William looked up, his eyes still red from crying but more clear than they'd been all night. What is it? Are you safe out there? Really safe? William considered the question carefully. I'm careful. I know which places to avoid, which shelters are better than others. I'm not using drugs or drinking, so I don't have those complications. But safe? He shrugged. Nobody living on the streets is really safe, Marcus. What would it take for you to get back on your feet, really back on your feet? That's a complicated question. Try me. William was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through his answer. I'd need a permanent address to put on job applications. Most places won't even consider you without one. I'd need interview clothes, access to regular showers, a phone number where employers can reach me. And honestly, at 54, with an 8-month gap in my employment history, he trailed off. But if you had those things? If I had those things, I think I could find work. Maybe not social work. The field has changed a lot, and my references are getting old. But something. I'm not afraid of starting over, I'm just afraid of not getting the chance to try. Marcus felt a decision crystallizing in his mind, one that probably wasn't entirely rational but felt absolutely right. What if you had a place to stay while you got back on your feet? William's expression grew cautious. What do you mean? I mean, what if you stayed with me? Just temporarily until you could find work and get your own place. Marcus, no. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. You don't understand what you're suggesting. I've been living on the streets for 8 months. I don't have anything to contribute. I'd just be a burden. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. When I was 12 years old, you taught me that accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Do you remember saying that? William's eyes widened slightly. You were upset about needing tutoring in math. I told you I should be able to figure it out myself, that asking for help was giving up. And I told you that the strongest people I knew were the ones brave enough to let others care about them. William finished softly. So let me care about you, Marcus said. Let me help. It's not the same thing, Marcus. You were a child who needed support. I'm a grown man who should be able to take care of himself. Why? Marcus challenged. Why should you have to do everything alone? You spent 22 years helping other people. Why is it so hard to accept help when you need it? William didn't have an immediate answer. Marcus could see him struggling with pride, shame, and the ingrained independence that had probably served him well during his months on the streets, but was now keeping him from accepting what he needed. My apartment isn't much, Marcus continued. 1 bedroom, but the couch is comfortable, it's clean, it's warm, and it's got a shower and a kitchen. You could use it as your address for job applications. What about your neighbors? Your landlord? What are you going to tell them about why you suddenly have a homeless man living with you? Marcus almost smiled. I'm going to tell them you're my father. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. It wasn't legally true, might never be legally true, but it felt more honest than any other explanation Marcus could think of. Am I? William asked quietly. Your father, I mean. After all this time, after everything that happened? Marcus thought about it seriously. William hadn't raised him, hadn't been there for his teenage years or his struggles as a young adult. But he had been the first person to make Marcus feel genuinely wanted, genuinely loved. He had been the template for what safety and belonging could feel like. I don't know what we are to each other now, Marcus said honestly, but I know you're the closest thing to a father I've ever had, and I know I'm not ready to walk away from that again. William's eyes filled with tears once more, but these seemed different, less about grief and more about hope. Are you sure about this? William asked. Really sure? Marcus thought about his quiet apartment, his carefully ordered life, his habit of keeping people at a safe distance. Opening his home to William would change all of that. It would be messy and complicated and uncertain. It would also be the first, genuinely brave thing he'd done in years. I'm sure, Marcus said. 2 hours later, Marcus was unlocking the door to his apartment in Pilsen, William standing nervously behind him with his worn leather satchel and a plastic bag containing his few possessions from the shelter. It's not much, Marcus said, stepping aside to let William enter first. William stood in the doorway, taking in the small but tidy space. The apartment was clearly the home of someone who valued simplicity and order. A comfortable couch facing a modest television, a small dining table with 2 chairs, books neatly arranged on a single bookshelf, and walls decorated with a few framed photographs and a Chicago Bulls poster that looked like it had been there since Marcus's teenage years. It's beautiful, William said softly. It's a real home. Marcus saw his apartment through William's eyes, not just the furniture and decorations, but the safety and permanence it represented. A place where you could lock the door and know you'd still be welcome tomorrow. A place where you could leave your belongings and trust they'd be there when you returned. The bathroom's down the hall, Marcus said, suddenly feeling awkward about the logistics of sharing space with someone he'd thought about but not seen for 20 years. There are clean towels in the closet. And I've got some clothes that might fit you. We're about the same size now. William set his bag down carefully, as if he still couldn't quite believe he was allowed to be here. Marcus, I want you to know that I understand this is temporary. I won't overstay. I won't take advantage of your kindness. I just need some time to get back on my feet. Stop, Marcus said gently. You don't have to earn your place here or apologize for needing help. This is your home for as long as you need it to be. The word home seemed to hit William hard. He sat down heavily on the couch, looking around the room again. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up on a park bench and this will all have been a dream, William admitted. Marcus understood the feeling. His own life had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. Yesterday morning he'd been a security guard with a quiet, predictable routine. Now he was sharing his home with the man who had almost adopted him, trying to figure out how to be family with someone who was essentially a stranger, but also the most familiar person in his world. "Why don't you get cleaned up?" Marcus suggested. "I'll make us some breakfast and then you can get some real sleep." William nodded gratefully and headed toward the bathroom. Marcus heard the shower start and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and nervousness. He'd made a huge decision on impulse, and now he had to live with the consequences. As he scrambled eggs and made toast, Marcus found himself thinking about the practical details. He'd need to help William get a new ID, update his address with social services, maybe help him put together a resume. The process of rebuilding a life from nothing was daunting, but at least now William wouldn't have to do it alone. When William emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, he looked like a different person. Clean-shaven, hair neatly combed, wearing Marcus's spare jeans and a button-down shirt that fit reasonably well. The transformation was remarkable. This was clearly the professional, capable man who had spent decades helping children. "Feel better?" Marcus asked, setting a plate of eggs and toast on the small dining table. "I'd forgotten what hot water felt like," William said with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time since Marcus had known him. "Thank you for all of this." They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, both of them adjusting to the surreal reality of sharing a meal in Marcus's kitchen. The morning sun streamed through the windows and the sounds of the neighborhood waking up, children laughing on their way to school, the distant rumble of the L train, created a peaceful backdrop. "I should probably call in sick to work tonight," Marcus said eventually. "I haven't slept and I want to help you get started on some of the practical stuff." "You don't have to do that. I can figure things out on my own." "I know you can," Marcus said. "But you don't have to. That's the point." William set down his fork and looked directly at Marcus. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you doing this?" "Really? I know you cared about me when you were a child, but that was a long time ago. I'm essentially a stranger now." Marcus considered the question, trying to put into words feelings he didn't entirely understand himself. "When I was a kid, you made me feel like I mattered," Marcus said slowly. "Not just like I was another case or another placement, but like I was important to you specifically, like my happiness and my future were worth fighting for." "They were," William said quietly. "I know. And when they took me away from you, it felt like losing the only person who had ever seen me as more than just a problem to be solved. I spent years thinking that maybe I'd imagined how much you cared, that maybe it hadn't been as real as I remembered." "It was real," William assured him. "I know that now. But for 20 years I've been carrying around this fear that I'm not worth fighting for, not worth keeping. Finding you again, seeing how much losing me hurt you too. It's like getting back a piece of myself I thought was gone forever." William's eyes filled with tears. "You were always worth fighting for, Marcus. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." "Then let me be the best thing that happens to you again," Marcus said. "Let me help you get your life back." 3 weeks later, William was sitting at Marcus's dining table, carefully filling out his 7th job application of the week. His hair was neatly trimmed, thanks to a friend of Marcus's who worked at a barber shop in the neighborhood. He had a small wardrobe of interview-appropriate clothes, assembled from thrift stores and discount retailers. Most importantly, he had an address, a phone number, and references from his old supervisor who had been genuinely happy to hear from him. Marcus came home from his shift at the hospital to find William cooking dinner, something that had become a comfortable routine. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs, and there was classical music playing softly from Marcus's old radio. "How did the interview go?" Marcus asked, hanging up his security jacket. "Better than I expected," William replied, stirring something that looked delicious in a large pot. "The director of the community center seemed genuinely interested in my experience. It's not social work exactly, but it's working with families, helping them navigate city services and find resources." "That sounds perfect for you." "It would be. The pay isn't much, but it's enough to start saving for my own place. And the work William's face lit up. It's exactly the kind of thing I used to love about social work. Helping people who are struggling, making connections, solving problems. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. He was genuinely happy that William was rebuilding his life, proud of how hard he'd worked over the past few weeks. But there was also a part of him that wasn't ready for William to move out, wasn't ready to go back to living alone. When would you start? Marcus asked. Next Monday, if I get it. And Marcus, William turned to face him. I want you to know that none of this would have been possible without you. Not just the practical help, but the belief that I could do it. For months, I'd started to think I was finished, that I'd never be anything more than a man sleeping on benches. You were never just that, Marcus said firmly. You were always the person who had dedicated his life to helping others. You just needed some help yourself. They ate dinner together, talking about William's potential new job, about Marcus's shift at the hospital, about plans for the weekend. It felt remarkably natural, this domestic routine they'd fallen into. Like they were making up for lost time, finding the rhythm of family life they'd never had the chance to develop. After dinner, William pulled out a manila folder he'd been carrying around for several days but hadn't shown to Marcus. There's something I need to give you, William said, his voice suddenly serious. He opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers, official documents, letters, and what looked like court filings. What is this? Marcus asked. It's everything from when I tried to adopt you, William explained. All the paperwork, all the appeals, all the letters I wrote to the judge trying to explain why we belong together. I've carried it with me for 20 years, even when I had nowhere to live. I couldn't let go of it. Marcus stared at the papers, overwhelmed. These documents represented the fight William had mentioned but never described in detail, evidence of just how hard he had tried to make them a family. I want you to have it, William continued. I want you to see that I never gave up willingly, and I want you to know that even though the system failed us, my love for you was real, is real. Marcus carefully took the folder, feeling the weight of it in his hands. 20 years of what-ifs and almosts, preserved in legal documents and passionate letters. There's something else, William said, reaching into his satchel. He pulled out a small wrapped package. I bought this right after the judge approved the adoption, before my supervisor intervened. I've been saving it ever since, hoping that someday. Marcus unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a simple silver watch, engraved with the words, "To my son, with love, W.P." Marcus's vision blurred with tears. You kept this for 20 years? I kept hoping I'd have a chance to give it to you for your birthday or graduation or your wedding or just someday. Marcus strapped the watch onto his wrist, feeling the solid weight of it, the reality of being claimed and loved and chosen, even across decades of separation. I have something for you too, Marcus said suddenly. He went to his bedroom and returned, with a small framed photograph, the only picture he had of himself and William together, taken during one of their weekend outings before everything fell apart. You kept this? William asked, amazed. It was the only proof I had that those months were real, Marcus admitted. That someone had actually wanted me enough to try to make me their son. They sat together on the couch, looking at the photograph of their younger selves, a social worker and a 12-year-old boy, both grinning at the camera, both unaware that their time together was about to end. We look happy, William observed. We're happy, Marcus said. And we can be happy again, differently, but really. William nodded, wiping tears from his eyes. I'd like that very much. 6 months later, William's apartment was small but comfortable, filled with books and plants and photographs of the children he'd worked with over the years. The walls were painted a warm yellow, and there was always coffee brewing and something interesting cooking on the stove. Marcus had helped him move in, had spent weekends painting and assembling furniture from thrift stores and estate sales. They'd established a routine of Sunday dinners alternating between their apartments, and Marcus had a key to William's place, just as William had a key to his. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, Marcus was nervously adjusting his tie in William's bathroom mirror, preparing for a conversation he'd been planning for weeks. "You look handsome," William called from the kitchen, where he was finishing preparations for dinner. "Sarah's going to be impressed." Sarah was a nurse from the hospital, someone Marcus had been dating for 2 months. Tonight was the first time he was bringing her to meet William, the first time he was introducing someone to the person he now simply called his father. The doorbell rang, and Marcus felt his stomach flutter with nerves. Not about Sarah. He was confident she'd like William, but about whether she'd understand the unconventional nature of their relationship, the way they'd found each other and chosen to be family. "I'll get it," William said, smoothing down his shirt and walking to the door. Marcus heard William's voice, warm and welcoming, followed by Sarah's laughter. By the time he emerged from the bathroom, they were already deep in conversation about the community center where William now worked as a family liaison. "Marcus has told me so much about you," Sarah said, smiling warmly at William. "He talks about you constantly." "All good things, I hope," William replied with a grin. "The best things," Sarah assured him. "It's clear how much you two mean to each other." During dinner, Marcus watched Sarah and William connect over stories about their work with families in crisis. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about William's years as a social worker, and William was genuinely interested in her experiences as a pediatric nurse. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, and Marcus felt something relax in his chest that he hadn't even realized was tense. After dinner, Sarah excused herself to the bathroom, and William turned to Marcus with a knowing smile. "She's wonderful," William said quietly. "And she clearly adores you." "You think so?" "I know so. The way she looks at you when you're talking. The way she laughs at your terrible jokes. That's not politeness. That's affection." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I really like her, William, more than I've liked anyone in a long time." "Then tell her that. Don't make the mistake I made, waiting for the perfect moment that never comes." When Sarah returned, Marcus suggested they move to the living room for coffee. As they settled onto William's comfortable couch, Sarah noticed the framed photograph on the side table, the same one Marcus had kept for 20 years, now displayed in a place of honor in William's home. "Is this you two?" she asked, picking up the frame. "That's us," Marcus confirmed. "About 20 years ago." Sarah studied the photograph, then looked between Marcus and William with curiosity and growing understanding. "You were so young," she said to Marcus. "William, you look exactly the same, just with less gray hair." William laughed. "I feel like a different person entirely from the man in that picture." "We both are," Marcus agreed. "But some things stay the same." Sarah set the photograph down carefully, and Marcus could see her processing what she was seeing. The obvious love between them, the way they interacted with the comfortable familiarity of people who had known each other forever, despite the fact that Marcus had mentioned they'd only recently reconnected. "Can I ask how you two found each other again?" Sarah said gently. "Marcus mentioned you'd lost touch for a while." Marcus and William exchanged glances, and Marcus made a decision. "It's a long story," Marcus said. "But the short version is that William was the social worker who almost adopted me when I was 12. The system intervened, we lost touch, and we found each other by accident when he was homeless and I was working security at the hospital." Sarah's eyes widened. That's incredible. What are the odds?" "Pretty astronomical," William agreed. "But sometimes the universe has a sense of timing, even when it doesn't seem like it at the time." "So you're not actually father and son?" Sarah asked, looking confused. Marcus felt William tense slightly beside him, and he realized this was the moment he'd been nervous about. The moment when he had to explain that family wasn't always about biology or legal documents. "We are father and son," Marcus said firmly. "Just not in the traditional way. William is the person who taught me what it felt like to be loved unconditionally. He's the person I call when I need advice, the person I have dinner with every Sunday, the person who cares about my happiness more than anyone else in the world. Biology doesn't make you family, love does." Sarah's face softened with understanding. That's beautiful, she said quietly. And it explains so much about you, Marcus. The way you take care of people, the way you see the best in everyone. That comes from being loved the way William loves you. William's eyes filled with tears, and Marcus felt his own throat tighten with emotion. It goes both ways, William said, his voice thick. Marcus saved my life, not just by giving me shelter when I needed it, but by showing me that it's never too late to be someone's family, that love doesn't have an expiration date. The three of them sat together in William's warm living room, surrounded by the evidence of a life rebuilt and a family chosen. Outside, Chicago hummed with the sounds of 8 million people living their lives. But inside, there was only the quiet contentment of people who had found exactly where they belonged. I have something I want to say, Marcus announced, suddenly, nervous again. Both William and Sarah looked at him expectantly. Sarah, I know we haven't been dating very long, but I need you to know that William isn't just someone I'm close to. He's my family. If we're going to keep seeing each other, you need to understand that he's going to be part of my life forever. Sarah smiled, reaching over to take Marcus's hand. I wouldn't have it any other way. From what I can see, he's a big part of what makes you the man I'm falling in love with. The words hung in the air, the first time either of them had mentioned love. Marcus felt his heart skip, and William's face broke into a grin. And William, Marcus continued, turning to face the man who had become his father in every way that mattered, I want you to know that I've never been happier than I am right now. Having you in my life, being able to call you family, it's everything I dreamed of as a kid and everything I needed as an adult. William reached over and pulled Marcus into a fierce hug, the kind of embrace that says everything words can't capture. I love you, son, William whispered, his voice breaking, slightly on the words he'd waited 20 years to say. I love you too, Dad, Marcus replied. And for the first time in his life, the word felt completely, perfectly right. As they sat together, Marcus and William and Sarah, family in all the ways that mattered, Marcus thought about that night, 6 months ago when he'd approached a homeless man on a bench outside the hospital. He'd thought he was just doing his job, just following protocol. Instead, he'd found his way home.